Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Nancy. I am a virtual assistance coach and a podcast manager. In today's video, I want to talk about people pleasing and how that is preventing you from getting to find out what your life's purpose is, what your purpose in life is, and how you can work around it. So what is people pleasing? People pleasing is when you constantly find yourself trying to mold yourself to fit other people's expectations. It is when you find yourself saying yes when you want to say no, agreeing to plans that you wouldn't have agreed to just because you don't want to elicit negative emotions in people. It's also when you find yourself feeling responsible for people's reactions, especially their emotional reactions to your decisions. So you try to adjust yourself and adjust your decisions so that you fit into what they expect you to. It's also trying as hard as you can not to disappoint others. If you find yourself working around all these, it's very likely that you are a people's pleaser. And I'm talking about these as someone who used to be a people's pleaser up until around my mid-20s. And now looking back, I wish I had come across such kind of content because it would have really helped me. So what is the impact of being a people's pleaser? Number one, you tend to lose touch with yourself because you try to mold yourself depending on the circumstance and depending on who you're hanging out with. You try to modify yourself and modify your behavior, modify your thinking so that you fit into what other people expect of you. You also find it hard to stand up for yourself simply because you feel that standing up for yourself and disappointing the other person will impact negatively on your relationship, and you will tend to feel guilty of the outcome of what you will say or what you will do. So you tend to find yourself not standing up for yourself. And if you can't stand up for yourself, who will? Who will? You also tend to lack self-identity simply because you've been trying to mold yourself and conform to probably what the society expects of you, what your friends expect of you, what your parents expect of you. And actually, a lot of people pleasing comes from how we were brought up, comes from how we were exposed and the kind of environment we grew up in. For example, if you're the kind of child who grew up in a family where you were afraid of disappointing your teachers or disappointing your parents or making a decision which was not in line with what was expected of you, you'll find yourself people pleasing a lot. And the first step to recovering from people pleasing is getting to understand and getting to accept that you are a people's pleaser, and I'll talk about that later in this video. Actually, after I graduated with my engineering degree, I remember back then someone would ask me what I studied. This was because before I got my job, and I could tell them what I pursued in campus, and I would see their faces light up. And I realized that this is what fueled my identity. My identity was based on other people's opinion about myself and not necessarily who I knew I was or who I truly was. I had lived in the fear of doing something that was not conventional, other than the roller coaster that had been charted for me, the path that had already been expected of me in terms of going to school and ticking all those boxes. I realized that I had been living in the fear of doing something that was not conventional, and quitting my engineering job to pursue something else, something totally different from what I had studied for the 5 years in campus took very many people by surprise. But then that was the beginning of me stopping being a people's pleaser. And today I want to share with you a few steps that you can take if you're a people's pleaser. If you're someone who constantly finds themselves trying to fit into what people expect of them at the expense of your comfort and at the expense of you being your true self, these are the steps that you can take to get over that. The first thing is being aware that you are a people's pleaser. And as they say that acceptance is the first step towards healing, of course, that is the first step towards stopping the people pleasing, and at the expense of your comfort. So first you need to accept that you're a people's pleaser, and you need to be aware that you've been people pleasing all along. And how do you do that? You have to sit down and try to list instances where you feel you did something because of what was expected of you and not really because that is what you wanted to do or you wanted to say. List down instances where you have done this, and it's important to identify them before they come up, because when they actually come up, for example, if a friend invites you over the weekend to go do something and you actually wanted to stay in or you wanted to do something else, if you find yourself agreeing to their plans at the expense of what you really wanted to do, list that down. Write a list of what you think are things you've been doing or would do if you had such a circumstance facing you. The next thing is to investigate your feelings. How, in the past, how have you felt when you compromised your true self or you compromised your true decisions? How did that make you feel? This is because you need to relate the decisions that you make to the feelings that they elicit in you. How do you feel after you accept doing something that you wouldn't have accepted to do? How do you feel when you go to a job that you don't love? How does that make you feel? Because you're going to this job just because that's what is expected of you. Just try and investigate how you feel when you do something that you probably wouldn't have done, and relate this to the decisions that you normally make when faced with a given circumstance where you feel you need to be the people pleaser that you already are. The next step is to identify your values. What are your values? Are you the kind of person who is honest? And by the way, when you are people pleasing, you are being dishonest to yourself, and that is the greatest disservice you can do to yourself. Are you the kind of person who enjoys the freedom of time, or are you the kind of person that enjoys traveling? What are the things that you enjoy doing? What are your values? Are you the person who prefers to be honest regardless of the circumstance, regardless of whether your boss will be unhappy with what you have to say, simply because you're being honest? Try and list your values and say that from today henceforth, you are going to stick to these values. You are going to uphold your values and be true to yourself. You also need to try and explore your interests. Try and look back and try to identify what is it that makes you happy. I, for example, realized that I really love working from home. For me, the office setup really doesn't do it for me. And when I realized that I love working from home, I love working in the comfort of my home, I made the necessary steps towards making sure that whatever I pursued in life supported the kind of lifestyle that I wanted to live. I realized that I'm someone who loves like traveling and not being tied down because of a job. Then I made the necessary steps towards making this a reality in my life. So try and explore your interests. Try and explore what is it that you really love doing. What is it that lights you up? What is it that makes you feel that you're actually living? This is how you get to identify what your true purpose in life is. And there's nothing as good as living your purpose. And then once you identify all this, you need to have boundaries in place, because there's no point in having all this listed down if you can't uphold your boundaries. Are you the kind of person who believes that weekends are meant to be for fun or for resting, but then you constantly find yourself carrying work home or going to work over the weekend, yet you had told yourself that for you, you'd rather have weekends to yourself, you'd rather sleep in or do or watch a movie or whatever you want to do? So once you identify what lights you up and you have identified the instances where you have been a people's pleaser and you have put your interests and you've identified what you love doing and you've decided to pursue what you enjoy and you have your goals in place, you will for sure have identified your purpose in life. So these are the tips that I find useful, especially when I am faced with circumstances where I'm afraid to make a decision or I am afraid to give my feedback based on what I feel other people will feel or how other people will perceive my decisions. These are the guides that I normally use, and I have found them really helpful, and I felt that I should share about this today. If there's anything that you have found useful, or if you have a tip that I have not spoken about, feel free to share it in the comments section below, and I'll be happy to read them and I'll be happy to share them with my audience. So until next time, bye bye.